Chapter 1, A New Beginning. Dean Herman had never been a fan of first days. They were like blind dates, awkward, full of forced smiles and prone to disaster. He adjusted the knot of his tie as he stepped into the glass-paneled lobby of Borland and Company. Design. The hum of holiday cheer already buzzing through the air. A towering Christmas tree dominated the center of the space, its ornaments gleaming like tiny planets orbiting a star. Someone had gone overboard with the fake snow spray on the windows, but Dean supposed that was the point. It was late November, and the city was determined to look like a snow globe even if the weather refused to cooperate. He checked his watch. 8:57 a.m. perfect. 3 minutes early. He liked being early, it gave him a buffer against chaos. Chaos had a way of finding him. The receptionist, a woman in a red sweater with a reindeer stitched across the front, smiled brightly. "You must be Dean Herman. Welcome to Borland and Company." Dean returned the smile. Polite but not effusive. "Thank you. First day jitters and all that." "Oh, you'll be fine," she said, waving him toward the elevators. "HR's waiting for you on the 10th floor. They'll get you settled." Dean nodded, murmured another thank you, and stepped into the elevator. He exhaled slowly as the doors closed. New job, new title, better pay. Patent management for the design division wasn't glamorous, but it was a step up from his last gig, a step away from the endless churn of casual office politics and the even more casual dating scene he'd grown tired of. He wasn't looking for romance, not actively, but he wasn't closed off either. If something happened, it happened. If not, well, he had enough on his plate. The elevator chimed, and the doors slid open to reveal a hallway lined with frosted glass offices. Tinsel framed the doorways like silver vines. Dean followed the signs to HR, where a cheerful hiring manager named Lydia greeted him with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for game show hosts. "Dean, welcome aboard." Lydia shook his hand like they were sealing a $1 million deal. "We're thrilled to have you. Let me introduce you to your team." Dean smiled, adjusted his tie again, and followed Lydia down the hall. She chatted about company culture, holiday charity drives, and the upcoming Christmas party. Dean nodded at appropriate intervals, storing the information without much thought. His focus was on the job, not the festivities. They stopped at a cluster of desks arranged in an open-plan space. A few employees looked up from their monitors, offering polite smiles. Lydia gestured toward a sleek office at the far end, its glass door ajar. "And this," Lydia said, her voice bright with pride, "is your immediate supervisor, April Borland." Dean's world tilted. April Borland. The name hit him like a snowball to the face. He knew that name. He knew that face. And when the woman inside the office turned, her expression confirmed it. Ghost white, eyes wide, lips parted in silent horror. Dean managed a polite smile, though his stomach did a slow somersault. April looked exactly as he remembered. Sharp cheekbones, chestnut hair pulled into a neat bun, and eyes that could slice through steel. The last time he'd seen those eyes, they were narrowing at him across a restaurant table, right before she vanished like smoke. "Dean," Lydia said, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. "Meet April Borland, head of design patents." April recovered first. Her smile was professional, but her voice wavered like a violin string. "Mr. Herman, welcome to the team." Dean extended his hand. "Ms. Borland." His tone was calm, even warm. No trace of the memory that had just detonated in his brain. "It's good to meet you again." Her grip was firm, but her eyes flickered with something between panic and disbelief. "Yes, again." Lydia clapped her hands. "Great. I'll leave you two to get acquainted. Dean, April will show you around." As Lydia disappeared, silence settled like fresh snow. Dean cleared his throat. "Well, small world." April's laugh was short, brittle. "Smaller than I'd like." Dean didn't flinch. He wasn't angry. Why would he be? Bad dates happened. Taxi flats, spilled wine, blocked numbers. Life was messy. He'd moved on. If anything, the situation was almost funny. Almost. April gestured toward the desk nearest her office. "That's yours. We'll go over your responsibilities after you settle in." "Sounds good." Dean set his bag down, his movements deliberate, calm. He could feel April's gaze on him, sharp as sleet. She was mortified, he could tell. And maybe that was fair. Their date had been a train wreck from start to finish. He tried to apologize afterward, but she'd blocked him before he could type the second sentence. He didn't blame her. If the roles were reversed, he might have done the same. He powered on his laptop, the hum of the machine filling the silence. April lingered in the doorway, arms crossed like a shield. "Dean," she said finally, her voice softer now. "About before." He looked up, meeting her eyes without hesitation. "Water under the bridge." Her shoulders eased a fraction. "You're okay with this?" "Why wouldn't I be?" He smiled, polite, steady, infuriatingly calm. "We had a bad night. It happens. You're my boss now. That's all that matters." April blinked, as if she'd expected sarcasm or bitterness. Instead, she got Dean Herman, polite to the point of irritation, unflappable even when fate threw curveballs like this. "Right?" she said, clearing her throat. Well, welcome to Borland and Company. Dean nodded, turning back to his screen. Outside the window, snowflakes began to drift lazily from a gray sky, dusting the city in white. Christmas was coming. And if the universe had a sense of humor, it was laughing its head off. Chapter 2, Professional Boundaries. Dean had always believed that silence was underrated. In a world obsessed with filling every gap with chatter, he found comfort in the quiet hum of productivity. His second day at Borland and Company was proof that silence could be both a shield and a weapon, especially when your boss was the woman who once vanished mid-date like a magician's rabbit. April Borland was efficient to the point of intimidation. Her office door stayed open, but her posture, straight-backed, arms often crossed, was a clear do not disturb sign. Dean respected that. He wasn't here to make friends or stir drama. He was here to manage patents, keep the paperwork flowing, and maybe, just maybe, avoid any more wine-related catastrophes. By mid-morning, Dean had already processed 2 design submissions and flagged a potential infringement issue. He was in his element, organized, methodical, calm. April, on the other hand, seemed determined to keep their interactions strictly professional, as if politeness were a fragile vase that might shatter if they breathed too hard. She appeared at his desk around 11, tablet in hand, expression neutral. "Dean, do you have a moment?" He looked up, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "Of course." She gestured toward her office. "Let's review the patent queue." Dean followed her inside, noting the minimalist decor, white walls, a single abstract painting, and a small poinsettia on the windowsill. The plant was the only hint of Christmas in the room, and even it looked like it had been placed there under protest. April sat behind her desk, scrolling through her tablet. "You flagged the Holbrook design?" "Yes," Dean said, settling into the chair opposite her. "The hinge mechanism is too similar to an existing patent. We'll need to advise a redesign." April's brows lifted slightly. "Good catch." Dean nodded, accepting the compliment without fanfare. "It's what I'm here for." Silence stretched for a beat too long. April cleared her throat, tapping the screen. "You seem very calm about all this." Dean tilted his head. "Should I be panicking?" Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "Most people on their second day are still figuring out where the coffee machine is." "I found it," Dean said deadpan. "It's next to the copier. Both life essentials in one convenient corner." April laughed, soft, quick, like she hadn't meant to. Dean felt the sound settle somewhere unexpected, warm against the chill of her usual reserve. She recovered quickly, sliding the tablet across the desk. "Here's the full queue. I'd like your input on prioritization." Dean leaned forward, scanning the list. "We should push the Kessler design to the top. It's time-sensitive, and their legal team is already circling." April nodded, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Respect, curiosity, or maybe just relief that he wasn't a walking disaster outside of restaurants. When the meeting ended, Dean returned to his desk, aware of April's gaze lingering a moment longer than necessary. He didn't dwell on it. He had work to do, and dwelling was a luxury he rarely indulged. The rest of the day passed in a rhythm of emails, document reviews, and the occasional burst of holiday cheer from the marketing team across the hall. Someone had set up a Bluetooth speaker blasting Christmas classics, and Dean found himself humming along to Let It Snow while drafting a compliance memo. He wasn't a Grinch, but he wasn't exactly Buddy the Elf either. Christmas was fine, lights, music, the smell of cinnamon, but it wasn't magic. Not anymore. At 5:30, Dean packed up his laptop, slipping on his coat as the office began to empty. April was still in her office, head bent over her tablet, the glow of the screen painting her face in shades of silver and blue. For a moment, Dean considered saying goodnight, just a simple, polite gesture, but something in her posture, tight, focused, made him hesitate. He settled for a nod as he passed her door. "Night, Ms. Borland." She looked up, startled, then smiled small, genuine. "Good night, Dean." Outside, the city was draped in lights, every lamppost wearing a garland like a festive scarf. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, melting on his coat collar. Dean shoved his hands into his pockets, his breath fogging in the cold air. He wasn't looking for anything, romance, drama, whatever, but life had a way of ignoring his plans. And if the universe was still laughing, Dean figured he might as well give it a good show. Chapter 3, The Office Party Invitation. Dean had barely settled into his morning routine, coffee, inbox triage, a quick scan of patent queues, when the email subject line popped up like a glitter bomb. "You're invited. Borland and Company. Annual Christmas party." He stared at it for a full 10 seconds, sipping his coffee like it might offer an escape clause. Office parties were a minefield. Too much small talk, too many forced laughs, and at least one person who thought karaoke was a competitive sport. Dean wasn't antisocial, but he preferred conversations that didn't involve shouting over Jingle Bell Rock. He clicked the email anyway. The details were predictably festive. Date: December 18th. Location: the Skyline Lounge. Dress code: festive chic, whatever that meant. Activities: ugly sweater contest, secret Santa exchange, live band. Dean sighed. Ugly sweaters. Nothing said corporate bonding like wearing something that looked like it lost a fight with a craft store. Dean, a voice said, pulling him from his thoughts. He looked up to see April standing by his desk, tablet in hand, expression carefully neutral. She was dressed in a deep green blouse today, the color making her eyes look sharper than usual. Dean wondered if that was intentional or just coincidence. Morning, he said, polite as ever. Morning. She hesitated, then gestured vaguely toward the email on his screen. So, the party. Dean raised an eyebrow. The one promising festive chic and public humiliation via sweaters? April's lips twitched, almost a smile. That's the one. Dean leaned back in his chair. Let me guess. Mandatory attendance. Strongly encouraged, she said, which was corporate speak for show up or risk being labeled a Grinch forever. It's good for team morale. Dean considered that. Team morale was fine, but his personal morale tended to plummet in rooms full of glitter and eggnog. Still, he wasn't about to make waves 2 weeks into a new job. I'll be there, he said simply. April blinked, as if she'd expected resistance. Really? Why not? Dean shrugged. Free food, questionable music, and the chance to see who owns the ugliest sweater in the tri-state area. Sounds festive. This time, April laughed, soft, genuine, the kind of laugh that made Dean glance up just to catch it. She shook her head, tapping her tablet. You're impossible. Polite, Dean corrected. Not impossible. April gave him a look that suggested the two were interchangeable. Anyway, there's also a secret Santa exchange. You'll get your assignment later today. Dean groaned inwardly. Gift exchanges were another social tightrope. Too personal and you looked creepy, too generic and you looked lazy. He'd probably end up buying a coffee mug with a snowman on it. Safe, predictable, boring. April seemed amused by his expression. Don't worry, it's anonymous. Until someone gets a scented candle and decides to hunt down the culprit, Dean said dryly. She laughed again, and for a moment, the tension that had hovered between them since day one seemed to melt like frost on a windowpane. Then her phone buzzed, and she straightened, professionalism snapping back into place. Anyway, she said, stepping back toward her office. Don't forget to RSVP. Dean watched her go, then turned back to his screen. RSVP, right? He clicked the button, sealing his fate. The rest of the day was a blur of patent reviews and holiday chatter drifting from the marketing team. Someone had hung a string of lights across the cubicles, and every time Dean looked up, they blinked like tiny Morse code messages. You can't escape the party. By late afternoon, the Secret Santa assignments arrived via email. Dean opened his with mild curiosity and froze. Your recipient, April Borland. Dean stared at the screen, coffee forgotten. Of course the universe would do this. It wasn't enough to make her his boss after the worst date in history. Now he had to buy her a gift without looking like he was trying too hard. He leaned back, rubbing his jaw. What did you buy for a woman who once blocked your number and now signed your performance reviews? A mug was too impersonal. A book? Too risky. Jewelry? Absolutely not. He needed something thoughtful but safe, festive but not flirty. Dean sighed. This was going to require strategy. And maybe a miracle. Chapter 4, A Chance Encounter. Saturday mornings were sacred to Dean. Quiet, predictable, and blissfully free of office politics. He spent them the same way every week. Coffee first, then a slow wander through Page and Pour, the hybrid cafe bookstore tucked between a florist and a boutique on Maple Street. It smelled like roasted beans and old paper, a combination Dean considered better than therapy. He pushed through the glass door, the bell chiming overhead. Warm air wrapped around him, carrying the scent of cinnamon and espresso. Christmas had invaded the shop, garlands draped across shelves, a tree glittering in the corner, and a chalkboard sign announcing holiday specials. Peppermint mocha and gingerbread latte. Dean ordered a black coffee, because sugar in liquid form was a crime, and drifted toward the fiction aisle. He was halfway through scanning a row of hardcovers when a voice behind him said, "Of course." Dean turned, coffee in hand, and froze. April Borland stood 3 feet away, her coat dusted with snowflakes, a scarf looped neatly around her neck. She looked different, softer somehow, less boardroom, more weekend. Her hair was down, curling slightly at the ends, and she held a paperback like it was a lifeline. Dean blinked. Of course what? April lifted the book, her expression wry. Of course you'd be here. You strike me as the type who spends Saturdays surrounded by books and caffeine. Dean considered that. And you strike me as the type who spends Saturdays doing literally anything else. Her lips curved. Fair point. But I needed a gift. Dean's brows rose. Secret Santa? April nodded, slipping the book under her arm. You? Dean hesitated, then smiled faintly. Same. For a beat, they just stood there, the silence oddly comfortable. Then April tilted her head toward the shelves. Any recommendations? Something that says, thoughtful but not creepy. Dean chuckled. That's a narrow category. Welcome to my life, she said dryly. Dean sipped his coffee, scanning the spines. Depends on the person. Do they like fiction? Nonfiction? Self-help? April gave him a look. If I knew that, I wouldn't be asking. Fair enough. He reached for a hardcover, flipping it open. This one's good. Light, funny. Doesn't require a PhD to understand. April took the book, skimming the blurb. Not bad. She glanced up, her eyes catching his. You're good at this. Dean shrugged. I read a lot. Occupational hazard of avoiding small talk. April laughed. Soft, genuine. The kind of laugh that made Dean's chest feel unexpectedly warm. He wasn't sure what to do with that, so he defaulted to politeness. So, he said, gesturing toward the cafe counter. Coffee? April hesitated, then shook her head. I should go. I have about 10 other errands before noon. Dean nodded, masking the faint sting of disappointment. Of course. She started toward the register, then paused, turning back. Dean? Yeah. Her smile was quick, almost shy. Thanks for the recommendation. Dean watched her leave, the bell chiming as the door swung shut. Outside, snowflakes swirled like confetti, and for the first time in a long while, Dean wondered if maybe, just maybe, the universe wasn't laughing at him. Maybe it was nudging. Chapter 5: The Party. Dean had never understood the phrase festive chic. Judging by the crowd at the Skyline Lounge, neither had anyone else. The company Christmas party looked like a collision between a fashion magazine and a craft store explosion. Sequins battled with tinsel, and someone had apparently decided that antlers were a viable accessory. Dean adjusted the cuffs of his navy sweater. Simple, understated, and blissfully free of blinking lights. He'd drawn the line at ugly sweaters. He wasn't about to wear something that jingled every time he moved. He scanned the room, noting clusters of coworkers laughing over cocktails, a live band crooning rockin' around the Christmas tree, and a table groaning under the weight of hors d'oeuvres. He spotted April near the bar, deep green dress hugging her frame in a way that made Dean's brain short-circuit for half a second. She was laughing at something one of the senior designers said, her head tilted back, eyes bright. For a moment, Dean considered retreating to the safety of the appetizer table. Then April glanced up, saw him, and smiled, quick, warm, like a spark in winter. Dean crossed the room, weaving through conversations about holiday plans and year-end bonuses. When he reached her, he offered his default greeting. Polite, steady, impossible to misinterpret. Evening, Ms. Borland. April arched a brow. We're off the clock, Dean. You can call me April. April, he said, tasting the name like it was something new. Nice party. She gave him a look that suggested she didn't buy his enthusiasm. You hate parties. Dean blinked. Do I? You strike me as the type, she said, sipping her drink. Quiet, reserved, probably allergic to karaoke. Dean glanced toward the stage, where someone was butchering All I Want for Christmas Is You with alarming confidence. You're not wrong. April laughed, and Dean felt that same unexpected warmth settle in his chest. He wasn't sure what to do with it, so he defaulted to humor. So, he said, nodding toward her drink. Eggnog. Peppermint martini, she corrected. Don't judge. Never, Dean said. I'm strictly a coffee and water guy. Anything else feels suspicious. April grinned. You're impossible. Polite, Dean countered, and she laughed again. Longer this time, like she'd stopped trying to hold it back. The night unfolded in a blur of holiday chaos. Someone convinced the CFO to wear a Santa hat. The marketing team staged an impromptu carol-off, and Dean found himself roped into a trivia game about Christmas movies. He answered exactly 2 questions correctly, both involving Die Hard, and escaped before anyone could drag him toward the karaoke stage. He ended up near the balcony, nursing a glass of water and watching snowflakes drift over the city skyline. The air was crisp, the lights below twinkling like a spilled jewelry box. For the first time all evening, Dean felt calm. Escaping? A voice said behind him. Dean turned to find April leaning against the railing, her cheeks flushed from the warmth inside. She held her martini glass loosely, her expression amused. Strategic retreat, Dean said. Karaoke was circling. April laughed softly, stepping closer. You're full of surprises. Dean tilted his head. Am I? You're different than I expected, she said, her voice quieter now. After, you know. Dean smiled faintly. The great wine disaster? Her lips curved. That's one way to put it. Dean shrugged, his tone easy. Bad night. Happens. April studied him for a moment, her gaze steady. You didn't have to come tonight. Dean met her eyes. Maybe I wanted to. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, like the hum before a string of lights flickers on. April looked away first, her smile lingering as she drained the last of her drink. Come on, she said, nodding toward the door. They're starting the ugly sweater contest. You don't want to miss that. Dean chuckled, falling into step beside her. Maybe he didn't hate parties after all. Chapter 6, The Snowstorm. Dean hadn't planned on staying late. The Christmas party had been enough social exposure to last him until Easter, but deadlines didn't care about his personal limits. By the time he finished reviewing the Kessler patent revisions, the office was nearly empty, the hum of conversation replaced by the soft drone of the HVAC system. He shut down his laptop, stretched, and glanced out the window and froze. Snow. Not the polite postcard kind. This was a full-blown whiteout, flakes swirling like confetti in a wind tunnel. The city below was a blur of headlights and brake lights, traffic crawling at a pace that made snails look ambitious. Dean muttered under his breath, pulling on his coat. He wasn't worried yet. He'd survived worse. A snowstorm was just weather, not a crisis. He headed for the elevator, mentally calculating how long it would take to walk to the subway without freezing solid. The elevator doors slid open, and there she was. April Borland, coat half-buttoned, scarf looped around her neck, phone pressed to her ear. Her expression was tight, her voice clipped. Yes, I see the traffic. No, I can't wait 2 hours for a car. Just forget it. She ended the call with a sigh, shoving the phone into her pocket. When she saw Dean, her brows lifted in something between relief and resignation. Looks like we're both stuck, she said. Dean glanced at the snow whipping against the glass doors. Looks that way. April hesitated, then nodded toward the lobby cafe. A small space with a few tables, a vending machine, and a coffee counter that looked like it hadn't seen a barista since Labor Day. We could wait it out. Dean considered his options, freezing on the sidewalk or sitting in a warm room with his boss, who also happened to be the woman who once ghosted him mid-date. Easy choice. Lead the way, he said. The cafe was deserted, its Christmas decorations half-hearted. A string of lights drooping over the counter, a tiny tree listing to one side like it had given up on life. Dean bought 2 coffees from the machine, handing one to April. Not exactly Skyline Lounge quality, he said. April smiled faintly, wrapping her hands around the paper cup. I've had worse. They sat at a corner table, the snowstorm raging beyond the glass. For a while, they talked about work, safe topics, familiar ground, patent queues, design deadlines, the upcoming holiday schedule. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, the conversation shifted, like snow drifting into unexpected patterns. So, April said, stirring her coffee with a plastic stick. That night, Dean looked up, meeting her gaze. The great wine disaster? Her lips curved. You make it sound like a historical event. Felt like one, Dean said dryly. Taxi flat, spilled wine, disappearing act. I'm pretty sure the universe was testing me. April winced. I'm sorry about that. I shouldn't have left like that. Dean shrugged, his tone easy. You didn't owe me anything. I blocked your number, she said, her voice quieter now. That was childish. Dean studied her for a moment, then smiled small, genuine. Water under the bridge. April exhaled, her shoulders easing. You're annoyingly calm. You know that? Occupational hazard, Dean said. If I panicked every time something went wrong, I'd never get through a day. April laughed softly, and the sound settled between them like warmth against the cold. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, the air felt different, lighter, charged with something neither of them named. By the time the storm eased enough for cabs to run again, it was nearly midnight. Dean walked April to the curb, his breath fogging in the icy air. A car pulled up, headlights slicing through the snow. April turned to him, her scarf catching a stray flake. Thanks for tonight. Dean tilted his head. For bad coffee and weather updates? For not making it awkward, she said, her smile quick, almost shy. You're good at that. Dean considered that as she climbed into the cab. Good night, April. Good night, Dean. The door closed, and the car slid into the snowy dark. Dean stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, watching the taillights fade. He wasn't looking for anything, romance, drama, whatever, but life had a way of ignoring his plans. And tonight, it felt like the universe had stopped laughing. Chapter 7: A shift in perspective. Monday morning arrived with the kind of brittle cold that made the city feel carved from glass. Dean stepped into the office, shaking snow from his coat, and was greeted by the familiar hum of keyboards and the faint scent of cinnamon from the break room. Christmas was closing in, garlands draped across cubicle walls. A bowl of candy canes perched on the reception desk like a bribe for holiday cheer. Dean didn't need bribes. He needed coffee. He was halfway to the machine when he noticed April in her office, head bent over a stack of design briefs. Nothing unusual there. April was always focused, always sharp. But something was different. Maybe it was the way her hair had slipped loose from its bun, curling against her cheek. Or maybe it was the memory of Saturday night, the snowstorm, the quiet conversation, the way her laugh had sounded softer than he remembered. Dean shook the thought away, filling his mug. He wasn't here for distractions. He was here to work. April, on the other hand, was distracted, and she hated it. She'd spent the weekend replaying that night in the cafe, the way Dean had handled her awkward apology with calm grace, like it was nothing. Like she wasn't the woman who'd ghosted him after a date so catastrophic it could have been televised. He hadn't flinched, hadn't thrown it in her face. He just smiled. And somehow that was worse, or better. She wasn't sure. April prided herself on being composed, but lately, every time Dean walked into a room, her brain short-circuited. It wasn't just that he was competent, though he was maddeningly so. It was the way he listened, the way he didn't fill silence with meaningless chatter, the way he seemed perfectly comfortable in his own skin, like calm was his default setting. And then there was his smile. Polite, yes, but when it lingered just for a second, it felt like something else. April pushed the thought aside, focusing on the patent cue. Professional. That was the rule. She was his boss. This was work. End of story. Except it didn't feel like the end. By mid-afternoon, Dean was in her office, reviewing a new design submission. April watched him scan the document, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was thorough, methodical without being rigid, confident without arrogance. When he spoke, his voice was steady, low, the kind of tone that made people listen without realizing they were doing it. This hinge mechanism, he said, tapping the page. It's clever, but it's going to trip over existing patents. We'll need to advise a redesign. April nodded, but her mind wasn't on the hinge. It was on the way his fingers moved, precise, deliberate as he flipped the page. She caught herself staring and looked away, heat creeping up her neck. April, Dean's voice pulled her back. She blinked. Right? Yes. Good catch. He gave her a look, curious, not smug, and for a moment, she wondered if he could read her thoughts. Then he smiled, small, polite, infuriatingly calm, and stood. I'll draft the advisory, he said. Anything else? April hesitated, then shook her head. No, that's all. He left, and April exhaled slowly, pressing her palms against the desk. She was in trouble. Not the HR kind yet, but the kind that made her pulse quicken every time he said her name. Dean returned to his desk, unaware of the storm he'd left behind. Or maybe not entirely unaware. He wasn't blind. April had been different lately, less guarded. Her laugh came easier, her smiles lingered longer. He didn't know what to make of it, and he wasn't about to assume anything. He'd learned the hard way that assumptions were traps. Still, as he typed up the advisory, he found himself thinking about Saturday night, the snow swirling outside, the quiet warmth inside, the way her voice had softened when she said his name. Dean wasn't looking for anything, but for the first time in a long while, he wondered what it would feel like to stop pretending he wasn't. Chapter 8, The Gift Exchange. Dean had never spent so much time thinking about a gift in his life. For 2 days, his brain had been a revolving door of bad ideas. Candles, too personal; mugs, too generic; scarves, too intimate; and gift cards, the nuclear option of laziness. April Borland was not a gift card person. She was precise, thoughtful, the kind of woman who probably alphabetized her spice rack. He needed something that said, I paid attention, without screaming, I'm trying too hard. By Thursday, he had it. A leather-bound notebook with a slim brass pen, tucked into a box lined with tissue paper. Practical, elegant, and most importantly, safe. April was always jotting notes during meetings. This wasn't romantic. It was professional. Mostly. Dean wrapped the box in matte silver paper, tied it with a simple red ribbon, and wrote the tag in his neat, blocky handwriting. To April, from Secret Santa. Done. No overthinking. No second-guessing. Except he was already second-guessing. The office buzzed with holiday energy that afternoon. A long table near the break room groaned under the weight of gifts, boxes, bags, and bows in every shade of festive excess. Someone had set up a speaker blasting Last Christmas, and the marketing team was harmonizing badly in the corner. Dean placed his gift among the others and retreated to his desk, pretending to review a patent submission while covertly watching April from the corner of his eye. She was laughing with one of the junior designers, her hair catching the glow of the string lights draped across the cubicles. She looked happy, relaxed, and Dean felt something shift in his chest, subtle but undeniable. He wasn't looking for anything. He kept reminding himself of that. But reminders were starting to sound like excuses. Okay, everyone. Lydia, the hiring manager, clapped her hands like a kindergarten teacher rallying for snack time. Secret Santa time. The team gathered around the table, voices bright with anticipation. April stood near the end, her expression composed but her eyes flicking over the pile of gifts like she was calculating probabilities. Dean hung back, arms crossed, his default armor of calm firmly in place. One by one, people tore into their packages. Mugs, chocolates, novelty socks, a questionable snow globe featuring a reindeer in sunglasses. Laughter rippled through the room, and then Lydia handed April a silver-wrapped box. Dean's pulse ticked up a notch. April untied the ribbon with careful fingers, peeling back the paper to reveal the notebook and pen. For a moment, her expression was unreadable. Then her lips curved, slow, genuine, like a candle flame catching. This is. She ran her fingers over the leather cover, her voice softer now. Perfect. Dean looked away, pretending to study the blinking lights on the garland. He wasn't fishing for gratitude. He wasn't. But when April glanced up, her eyes scanning the room as if trying to spot her anonymous benefactor, Dean felt heat creep up his neck. Whoever my Secret Santa is, she said, her smile lingering. Thank you. Dean kept his expression neutral, his hands steady at his sides. Polite, always polite. But inside, something was unraveling, quiet, slow, like snow melting under sunlight. Later, as the crowd thinned and people drifted back to their desks, April passed by Dean's workstation. She paused, tapping the notebook against her palm. "Nice choice," she said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "Whoever picked it knows me well." Dean met her gaze, his own steady. "Lucky guess." April's lips twitched, almost a smile, almost a challenge. "Maybe." She walked away, leaving Dean staring at his screen, his thoughts anything but professional. Chapter 9, Misunderstanding. Friday morning started like any other. Coffee, inbox, the quiet hum of keyboards, but by noon, the air in the office felt charged, like static before a storm. Dean didn't notice it at first. He was buried in a patent compliance report, his focus locked on a clause that could derail an entire design rollout. It wasn't until he overheard snippets of conversation near the break room that something tugged at his attention. April wasn't thrilled, someone whispered. Looked like favoritism. Gift was way too personal. Dean froze mid-sentence, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Gift, favoritism. His stomach sank like a stone in icy water. He closed the report and leaned back, replaying the words in his head. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. April, the notebook, his secret Santa choice, the one he'd agonized over to make sure it was thoughtful but safe, was apparently making the rounds as office gossip. Dean exhaled slowly, forcing calm into his veins. He hated gossip. It was noise, static, the kind of thing that turned professionalism into a soap opera. He wasn't about to feed it. Still, the idea that April might think he'd crossed a line, that stung. By mid-afternoon, he decided to address it. Direct, professional, no drama. He knocked lightly on April's office door, and she looked up from her tablet, surprise flickering across her face. "Dean," she said, "come in." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I wanted to clear something up." April set the tablet down, her expression cautious. "Okay." Dean kept his tone even. "The gift, the notebook. I've heard comments." Her brows knit. "Comments about it being too personal." He met her gaze, steady. "That wasn't my intention." April blinked, then laughed. A short, incredulous sound. "Dean, it was a notebook." "Apparently, that's enough to spark a scandal," he said dryly. April shook her head, smiling now. "People will gossip about anything. Ignore it." Dean hesitated. "You're not uncomfortable?" Her smile softened. "No, I liked it. A lot." Something in Dean's chest eased. But before he could respond, April added, "Though, I did wonder." Dean tilted his head. "Wonder what?" "If you were my secret Santa," she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp. Dean considered his options. Deny, deflect, or admit. He chose honesty, mostly. "Lucky guess," he said, echoing his line from before. April's lips curved, amusement flickering in her gaze. "Right?" The silence that followed wasn't awkward, but it wasn't neutral either. It hummed, low and steady, like a wire-carrying current. Dean cleared his throat, shifting back to business. "Anyway, I just wanted to make sure we're good." "We're good," April said, her voice warm now. "Better than good." Dean nodded, turning to leave. But as he reached the door, her voice stopped him. "Dean," he glanced back. "Yeah." Her smile was quick, almost shy. "Thanks, again." Dean walked out, his pulse ticking faster than he liked to admit. Misunderstanding resolved. Crisis averted. And yet, as he returned to his desk, one thought kept circling like snow in a winter wind. Better than good. Chapter 10, Resolution. The office was quieter than usual on Tuesday afternoon. The kind of lull that came when deadlines were met and holiday anticipation hung in the air like tinsel. Dean sat at his desk, reviewing a final compliance report, but his focus kept drifting. To the closed door of April's office, to the memory of her smile when she said better than good. He'd spent the weekend thinking about it. Not obsessing. Dean didn't obsess, but turning it over in his mind like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. He wasn't looking for anything. He'd told himself that 100 times. But every time April laughed, every time her eyes lingered just a second too long, that mantra sounded less like truth and more like denial. By 4 o'clock, he'd made a decision. No games. No guessing. Just clarity. He knocked lightly on her door. "Got a minute?" April looked up from her tablet, surprise flickering across her face before she gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Sure." Dean stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He sat, leaning forward slightly, his hands clasped loosely. Calm. Always calm. But his pulse was a steady drumbeat under the surface. "I wanted to talk," he said. April tilted her head, cautious but curious. "About what?" Dean met her gaze, steady. "About us." Her brows lifted, and for a moment, silence stretched like a taut wire. Then she set the tablet down, folding her hands. "Okay." Dean exhaled slowly. "I know we started on unusual footing. That night, the date, it was a disaster. And then we ended up here working together. I didn't expect that. But lately," he paused, searching for words that didn't sound like a script. "Lately, it feels like something's changed." April's eyes softened, but her voice was careful. "You're not wrong." Dean nodded, his tone even but his chest tight with something he refused to name. "I'm not interested in casual. I never have been. If that's what you want, that's fine, I respect it. But I needed to be clear." April studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, small, genuine, like sunlight breaking through frost. "Dean, I'm not looking for casual either." The tension in his shoulders eased, but he didn't let relief turn into assumption. "So, what are you looking for?" Her smile widened, just a fraction. "Something real. Something that doesn't feel like a disaster." Dean chuckled softly, the sound low and warm. "Low bar, considering our history." April laughed, and the sound filled the room like music. True. For a moment, they just sat there, the silence no longer heavy but alive, charged with possibility. Outside the window, snowflakes drifted lazily, settling on the ledge like punctuation marks to a sentence neither of them had finished. Dean stood, his voice steady. "Coffee? After work?" April's eyes met his, bright and certain now. "I'd like that." Dean nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "Good." As he left her office, the hum of the HVAC and the glow of the Christmas lights felt different, warmer, sharper, like the world had tilted just enough to make room for something new. Chapter 11, Christmas Eve. The city looked like a snow globe shaken by an enthusiastic child. Lights glittered along every street, wreaths hung from lampposts, and the air smelled faintly of pine and roasted chestnuts. Dean walked briskly through the crisp evening, scarf snug around his neck, breath fogging in the cold. He wasn't late, he never was, but he felt the kind of anticipation that made minutes stretch like hours. April had chosen the cafe on the corner of Willow and Fifth, a quiet spot with frosted windows and a string of golden lights framing the door. When Dean stepped inside, warmth wrapped around him like a blanket. The scent of cinnamon and coffee mingled with soft strains of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas playing from hidden speakers. She was already there, seated at a small table near the window, her coat draped over the chair, a mug cradled in her hands. Her hair was down again, curling slightly at the ends, and the glow from the lights turned her skin to porcelain and her eyes to something that made Dean forget the cold entirely. "Dean," she said, smiling as he approached. "You made it." "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, pulling off his gloves and settling across from her. "Traffic wasn't bad?" "Surprisingly smooth," she said, her tone light. "Either everyone's home already or Santa cleared the roads." Dean chuckled, signaling the barista for a black coffee. "Santa's efficient." April laughed softly, and for a moment, silence settled between them. Not awkward, but warm, like the hush of falling snow. Outside, flakes drifted lazily past the window, catching the glow of streetlights like tiny sparks. They talked about everything and nothing. Holiday plans, favorite books, the absurdity of ugly sweater contests. April teased him about his minimalist wardrobe. Dean countered with a deadpan remark about sequins being a public hazard. She laughed, and the sound curled through the air like music. At one point, April grew quiet, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "You know," she said, her voice softer now, "I didn't expect this." Dean tilted his head. "This? Us?" she said, meeting his gaze. "After that night, I thought we'd never speak again." Dean considered that, his tone steady but warm. "Life's messy. People make mistakes. Doesn't mean they can't start over." Her smile was quick, almost shy. "You really believe that?" Dean nodded. "I do." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of possibility, of something fragile but real. Outside, a careless voice floated faintly through the glass, singing about peace on earth and goodwill toward men. Dean wasn't sure about the world, but sitting here he felt like goodwill was possible. When they stepped outside, the night was a canvas of snow and light. The air was sharp, the city hushed except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional burst of laughter from passing pedestrians. April pulled her scarf tighter, her breath fogging in the glow of the street lamps. Dean walked beside her, hands in his pockets, resisting the urge to reach for hers. Not yet, not until he was sure. They paused at the corner, where a towering Christmas tree glittered in the plaza, its ornaments catching the light like jewels. April stared up at it, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Dean looked at her. Not the tree, not the lights, but her, and thought, "So are you." He didn't say it. Not yet. But when she turned to him, her eyes bright, her smile lingering, he felt the words settle in his chest like a promise. Chapter 12, The Kiss. Snow fell in lazy spirals, softening the edges of the city like a watercolor painting. Dean and April walked side by side through the plaza, their footsteps crunching against the thin layer of frost. The towering Christmas tree glittered behind them, its lights casting a golden glow that spilled across the cobblestones. Dean's scarf was doing its job, mostly, but the cold still nipped at his skin. He didn't mind. Not tonight. Tonight, the chill felt like part of the magic, the kind that made breath visible and moments sharper. April slowed near a bench dusted with snow, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright beneath the glow of the street lamps. "It's beautiful out here," she murmured. her voice carrying a softness that tugged at something deep in Dean's chest. He nodded, his tone steady but warm. Almost makes up for the ugly sweater contest. April laughed, the sound curling through the night like music. You're never going to forgive that, are you? Not until the sequins stop haunting me, Dean said deadpan. She grinned, shaking her head, and for a moment, silence settled between them. Not awkward, not empty, but full. Full of everything they hadn't said yet. Dean's pulse ticked faster, but his voice stayed calm. April. She turned, meeting his gaze, and the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. The hush of falling snow, the glow of lights, the warmth of her breath mingling with his. I'm glad we did this, he said quietly. Her smile softened. Me too. The words hung there, fragile and bright, and then, slowly, deliberately, Dean reached for her hand. Her fingers slid into his like they'd been waiting, and something in his chest unraveled, quiet and sure. April stepped closer, her scarf brushing his coat, her eyes searching his. Dean. He didn't rush. He didn't speak. He just leaned in, the cold forgotten, the noise of the city fading until there was only her, the warmth of her breath, the curve of her smile, the way her lashes lowered as their lips met. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like testing the strength of ice before stepping onto it. Then it deepened, slow and certain, and Dean felt the world tilt, not violently, not chaotically, but gently, like snow settling on a branch. When they broke apart, April laughed, a breathless, quiet sound that made Dean's heart feel like it had been rewired. You're still annoyingly calm, she whispered. Dean smiled, his voice low. Occupational hazard. She shook her head, her fingers tightening around his. Don't change. Dean didn't plan to. Not tonight. Not ever. Above them, the Christmas lights blinked like tiny stars, and for the first time in a long while, Dean felt something he hadn't expected. Not just warmth, not just hope, but the quiet certainty that this was where he was meant to be. Chapter 13 Epilogue. 3 weeks later, the office had shed its holiday sparkle. The garlands were gone, the tree dismantled, and the candy cane bowl replaced with a jar of pens. January had arrived with its usual gray skies and relentless emails, but for Dean, the world felt different. He sat at his desk, reviewing a patent compliance update, when a message popped up on his screen. April Borland. Lunch? Or are you married to that spreadsheet? Dean smirked, typing back. Spreadsheet and I are on a break. Where to? Her reply was instant. The cafe downstairs. 10 minutes. Dean grabbed his coat, ignoring the curious glance from a junior designer. Office gossip had simmered down after the holidays, but the whispers hadn't vanished entirely. He didn't care. Let them speculate. He and April weren't hiding, they were just navigating. And so far, navigation was going well. The cafe was quiet, its decor stripped of tinsel but still warm with soft lighting and the hum of conversation. April was already there, a folder beside her coffee cup, her smile quick and bright when she saw him. You're late, she teased. Dean checked his watch. I'm 2 minutes early. Late by my standards, she said, eyes glinting. Dean slid into the chair opposite her, his tone dry. You're redefining time now? Someone has to, she said, sipping her coffee. They talked about work first, new design submissions, upcoming deadlines, but the conversation drifted easily, like it always did now. April teased him about his minimalist wardrobe. Dean countered with a remark about her color-coded calendar. She laughed, and the sound curled through the air like music. At one point, April leaned back, her expression softening. You know, she said, I didn't think this would be easy. Dean tilted his head. And it's not, she admitted. But it's worth it. Dean smiled, small, steady, the kind that felt like a promise. Agreed. Later, as they walked back to the office, April's hand brushed his. Dean didn't hesitate. He took it, their fingers intertwining like it was the most natural thing in the world. No drama, no grand declarations, just quiet certainty. Outside, the city was stripped of holiday glitter, but Dean didn't miss it. He'd found something better, something real, something steady, something that made even gray skies feel bright. And if the universe was still laughing, Dean figured it was laughing with him this time.